Before the world gets a vote, most people have already handed it the keys. The phone lights up, the thumb moves on reflex, and in a few clumsy seconds, the mind is no longer their own. A message sets the tone. An inbox sets the pace. A headline slips a low-grade panic into the bloodstream. It is awkward how fast this happens. You are not even fully awake, and somehow you are already reacting, already behind, already pulled into problems that were waiting outside the room. Marcus Aurelius trained against that exact weakness. He did not treat the morning like empty time to be filled. He treated it like a forge, the place where the mind is heated, shaped, and strengthened before pressure arrives. That matters because the first hour does more than start the day. It colors it. So this is not about building a prettier routine or performing discipline for its own sake. It is about refusing to leak attention before you have chosen where it goes. The aim is simple and demanding. Build enough inner structure at dawn that the outer world does not get to define you by default. That is the frame for the 6 rituals ahead. For the first 60 minutes after waking, do not consume the world before you have governed yourself. That first hour is where the weather gets made. Long before the conflict, the setback, or the hard conversation, something quieter has already happened. The mind has taken its shape for the day. That is the part most people miss. They think self-mastery shows up in the dramatic moments, when pressure is obvious and everyone can see the strain. But the real shift happens earlier, when the room is still quiet, the light is still low, and your thoughts are easy to stain without noticing it. The Stoics were sharp on this point. What you let in first does not stay small. If the morning begins with noise, the mind starts vibrating with noise. If it begins with comparison, attention gets scattered. If it begins with urgency, the whole day takes on a defensive posture. It feels normal in the moment, but it is a strange way to live. A better start is less exciting and far more useful. Reason first. Duty first. Clear thought before outside input. That is not performance. It is construction. You are building something load-bearing before the pressure shows up. So the real question at dawn is simple. Are you checking the weather outside, or are you building the weather within? Habit 1. The dawn command. Win before rising sounds simple until the room is cold and the blanket is warm. That is where this starts. Not with a grand speech. With a small, ugly moment of friction when the alarm goes off and one part of you reaches for comfort before you are even fully conscious. You know the scene. The hand moves toward the blanket. The mind starts bargaining. 5 more minutes. Maybe 10. It is almost embarrassing how persuasive that sleepy voice can sound. Then a second voice has to cut through it cleanly. Get up. You have work to do as a human being. That was Marcus Aurelius at his best. He did not wait to feel ready. He did not ask whether the morning matched his mood. He treated waking as a return to function. That is a stronger frame because it shifts the question. Not do I feel like getting up? What is my role? And will I meet it? This matters because the first battle of the day is rarely external. It is internal softness. If you lose that first negotiation, the rest of the morning takes the same shape. You drift. You delay. You start the day from beneath yourself. But if you win that first moment, something important locks into place. Identity gets reinforced before breakfast. Discipline is not dramatic here. It is immediate. It is the speed at which you stop bargaining with your lower impulses and stand up anyway. Use one line and keep it plain. I am not waking up to feel comfortable. I am waking up to fulfill my function. Then track it with a brutal little scorecard. Did I get out of bed within 60 seconds? Yes or no? Once you can win that first wall, you are ready for the next problem, which is the shock of other people behaving exactly like people. Habit 2. The shield of expectation. Remove the surprise tax starts here, in a quiet kitchen before anything has gone wrong. You are pouring water, half awake, and your mind is already sprinting ahead to meetings, delays, traffic, and that one person who always seems to bring static into the room. This is where most people make a costly mistake. They hope for a perfectly smooth day, then act shocked when the world behaves like the world. Marcus Aurelius trained the opposite response. He would remind himself that he might meet arrogance, ingratitude, interference, and dishonesty, not to become cynical, but to stop being caught off guard. That distinction matters. This practice is called premeditatio malorum. It sounds severe until you feel how practical it is. You are not predicting doom. You are removing shock. And a lot of anxiety is really just unplanned contact with ordinary friction. That is awkward to admit, but useful once you see it. Picture 2 familiar scenes. At 8:17, a message lands from a boss and it feels unfair on first read. Or someone cuts across your lane, then looks irritated like you caused it. The untrained mind says, "Why is this happening to me?" The trained mind says, "Of course, friction exists." Respond well. That shift changes the pace of emotion. Once surprise is removed, irritation loses momentum and reason gets a chance to work. Use one line to set the tone. Today will contain friction, but friction is not an emergency. Then check yourself at noon with a simple score from 1 to 5. How surprised was I by ordinary human difficulty today? When surprise stops draining you, the next move is even stronger. You decide where your energy is actually allowed to go. Habit 3. The sovereign audit. Left column only is a useful rule because most people waste their best energy on the right column before breakfast. Notebook open. 2 columns. On one side, effort, attitude, speech, attention. On the other, delays, outcomes, opinions, market conditions, someone else's mood before coffee. That split is the heart of the Stoic move. The dichotomy of control is not abstract philosophy. It is a morning filter. Without it, attention starts leaking immediately. You replay a conversation that has not happened yet. You imagine how a client might respond. You try to manage reactions that do not belong to you. It feels responsible, but it is mostly disguised helplessness. The sovereign mind does something simpler and harder. It audits reality early. What is mine? What is not? Then it commits. If there is a pitch today, your preparation is yours. The client's decision is not. If there is a difficult conversation waiting at noon, your honesty is yours. Their approval is not. That distinction clears a surprising amount of noise. This habit matters because attention without boundaries becomes mental sprawl. And once the mind sprawls, the day starts ruling you by diffusion. The inner citadel is not built by controlling everything around you. It is built by refusing to confuse stewardship with ownership, even when that feels a little uncomfortable at first. Use one clean line. I will give full effort to what depends on me and zero emotional tribute to what does not. Then, make it physical. Write 3 items in a depends on me column every morning. Only 3. If the item is not fully governable, it does not get to live there. Once that column is clear, the next step is to put the same discipline into the body, because a stable mind gets stronger when it learns to move on command. Habit 4. Physical anchoring. Move before media is where this gets real. The phone stays face down. Your shoes go on, and your feet hit a cold floor before the world has a chance to flood your head with borrowed urgency. That small sequence matters more than it looks. You stretch, walk, do a few push-ups, maybe step outside while the air still has that early morning bite. Your body complains a little. It always does. Good. We move anyway. That line is not about fitness culture. It is about authority. Stoicism was never meant to be a collection of clever thoughts floating above real life. The body matters because it trains obedience. When you move on purpose before you consume anything, you prove that discipline is not just an idea you admire. It becomes breath, posture, effort, repetition, and that changes the texture of the morning. A lot of people feel foggy not because they are broken, but because they go straight from sleep to screens with no transition at all. No embodiment. No signal that the campaign has begun. The old Stoic frame for this is useful. Live like a disciplined campaign, not a random drift. You do not need a heroic workout. You need a non-negotiable physical anchor. The version can be small. A parent gets 10 or 15 quiet minutes before the house gets loud. A remote worker walks outside before opening the laptop. Different lives. Same principle. Move before consumption. Keep the rule plain. Before I consume information, I will move my body for at least 10 minutes. Then track it with a simple yes or no streak. Once the body is anchored, the next challenge is subtler. You have to stop turning ordinary events into emotional theater with the language in your own head. Habit 5. Descriptive detachment. Take the adjectives out, and the day gets easier to handle. Leave them in, and your mind starts acting like a bad narrator, adding tension before anything has even happened. You see it the second you look at the calendar. There is the old voice saying this meeting will be brutal. This call is going to be a nightmare. That conversation tonight will be a disaster. Then there is the better voice, quieter and more useful. At 10 o'clock, I am discussing a delayed project with 2 colleagues. At 6, I am having a conversation that requires clarity. It sounds almost too simple, which is why most people skip it. But this is one of the most practical Stoic habits there is. A surprising amount of suffering comes from verbal inflation. We label an event before it unfolds. We load it with threat, embarrassment, insult, collapse. Then the body responds to the label as if the danger is already here. That is the trap Marcus Aurelius kept cutting through. He kept returning things to plain description. A meeting is not oppression. An inbox is not an attack. A hard conversation is not the end of your stability. That is not denial. It is clean framing. And framing changes what your nervous system does next. This works especially well in ordinary situations that tend to spiral. Before a performance review at work, before a tense family conversation at home, in both cases, the emotional adjective arrives early and tries to seize control. If you strip it out, something useful opens up. Space. And once there is space, judgment has room to function. Use one line as a rule. Describe the event without the emotional adjective. Each morning, rewrite one stressful event in neutral language. If the sentence includes words like awful, humiliating, impossible, or insane, rewrite it. Even then, one deeper filter still remains, because calm language means little if you forget that this day is finite. Habit 6, the memento mori filter. Filter through finitude, and a lot of noise falls away on its own. When you remember the day is limited, the trivial stops dressing itself up as important. That is the point of this final practice. You sit still for a moment before the day fully begins. Not in a dark or dramatic way, just clear enough to ask two hard questions. If this were my last day, what would become instantly unimportant? And what duty would become non-negotiable? Those questions change the texture of attention fast. This is memento mori used properly. Not as a slogan, not as mood lighting, as a sorting mechanism. When life is seen as finite, petty resentment gets exposed. Fake urgency drops in status. Minor irritation loses its grip. You stop treating the day like an endless supply and start treating it like entrusted time. That shift does not make you passive. It makes you exact. The person who remembers death does not become slower or softer. They become cleaner. They waste less attention. They complain less. They postpone less. They stop performing life and start inhabiting it. That can feel a little uncomfortable at first, because it strips away a lot of excuses along with the noise. Picture two mornings. One begins with comparison, background, dread, and a vague feeling of being pulled around. The other begins with the sober awareness that today matters because it will never return. The second person is much harder to manipulate because small things no longer get to pose as ultimate things. That is what seals the whole structure. You woke on command. You expected friction. You sorted control. You moved the body. You cleaned up your language. Then you passed the day through mortality and purpose. Use one line and mean it. Because this day is finite. I will not spend it on what is beneath my character. Then write one sentence every morning. Today matters because blank. If the answer only lists tasks, rewrite it around character or duty. And once you hear this whole routine, one objection always shows up right on cue. That objection always shows up once people hear a routine like this. It sounds reasonable on the surface. A strict morning structure kills spontaneity. It makes life rigid. But that only sounds true if you confuse chaos with freedom. A reactive person is not spontaneous. They are simply available to disruption. Their mood gets moved by whatever arrives first. A text, a delay, a bad tone in someone's voice. That is not flexibility. That is exposure. Marcus Aurelius trained early, not because he worshipped routine, but because he understood what structure protects. It protects sovereignty. It gives you enough inner order to stay calm when the outer world becomes messy. That is the part people miss, and it matters. A weak morning makes you emotionally expensive for the rest of the day. A structured morning does the opposite. It gives you room to adapt without becoming fragile. And that leads naturally to the most human part of all this. What this shift actually looks like in ordinary life. This is where the shift gets uncomfortably obvious in real life. A lot of mornings feel lost before the feet even touch the floor, because the phone arrives first. Then the mind fills with borrowed urgency. One small change tends to reveal everything. Leave the phone outside the bedroom for a week. The first morning feels awkward. The hand still reaches for something that is not there. But the silence is useful. You notice your thoughts sooner. You catch the anxiety before it gets dressed up as productivity. And the whole day feels different when your attention belongs to you before it belongs to the world. That is enough theory. The useful question is whether you can build it into a real week without turning it into another performance. So treat this like an experiment, not a personality test. For 7 days. Protect the first hour after waking with 6 simple moves. Get out of bed within 60 seconds. Expect friction without resentment. Write your 2 control columns. Move for 10 minutes. Rewrite one stressful event in neutral language. Ask the memento mori question. Then score the morning from 0 to 6. Nothing fancy. Just honest. At night. Check 3 things. How reactive were you today on a scale from 1 to 5? How many times did you leak energy into things you could not control? And did you feel governed from within, or dragged around from outside? That last one is awkwardly revealing, which is exactly why it works. At the end of the 7th day, look for one ratio only. Constructed mornings versus reactive mornings. Do not ask whether you did it perfectly. Ask whether you entered the day as its architect, or as its victim. Architect or victim gets decided earlier than most people think. It gets decided at dawn, in those quiet minutes when no one is watching and the world has not fully made its demands yet. That is where identity gets built. That is where attention gets reclaimed. That is where the mind takes on its color for the day. Which is why a strong morning routine is not some polished productivity trick. It is a blueprint for character. It is how you stop being ruled by notifications, moods, and outside pressure and start becoming the steady hand at the wheel. So keep this simple for the next 7 days. Do not try to redesign your whole life. Just build your dawn. And if this gave you a framework you can actually use, subscribe and drop this in the comments. I build before I react.